The story of a family that no matter where they go, they experienced paranormal phenomena. A woman is attacked by an incubus on her own bed. The reality surpasses the fiction. Hi friends, welcome to a new episode of the Chronicles of the Unexplained podcast. In today's episode, I'm gonna tell you two true stories. The first of them happened to one of my sisters and I long time ago. I was about 13 years old and my sister was about 8 years old. The place where these events occurred was in the house of one of my mother's in-laws at that time. It turns out that this family lived in a house where many unexplained things used to happen. This house, I must say that although it was not a centuries-old construction, it was already a house several decades old, and therefore it must have had some history. I remember at that time I used to hear countless situations that they told that they had experienced. I must confess that in that particular house I never stayed to sleep, but I did stay in the new house, the house that they built. And that is where the events that I'm about to tell happened to us. This family was a normal family. The parents and 4 children. They were good people. Well, they still are. 3 sons and a daughter. The father unfortunately passed away long time ago. But at that time, he was a hard-working person and did very well in his businesses. They were building a new house in one of the best subdivisions in the city. Going back to the story, I remember how he told us his experiences with a touch of joke because of so many things that happened to him. He got used to those unexplained events, and not only he experienced them, but all the members of the family. He used to chase away spirits or entities. He used to scare them away by cursing, saying bad words to them, since the folklore of Mexico says that bad words can scare away those spirits or ghosts. It is said that if you say any rude words to them, they leave. I'm not so sure about this, but that's the belief. Time passes and the construction of the new house is finally finished. They move, they start a new life there. It seemed that everything was going well at first. They believed that the spirit or energy that manifested itself in the old house was finally going to let them live in peace. But no, it wasn't. One day in one of the gatherings they used to do, they said that the new house also experienced weird things. The man had a unique way of expressing himself, since he was very funny. Since he always saw everything on the positive side. He used to refer to the spirit in a different ways. He used to use a lot of more words that I can't repeat here. He said that he had followed him to his new house and that he had already made peace with him because if you can't beat the enemy, join him. He said that things moved by themselves. In fact, on one occasion, my mom had to see how an object moved out of nowhere. She says that it was a plastic syringe with which they gave medicine to one of their dogs. It was right where the fireplace was, and my mom tells me that while she was there, suddenly the syringe flew out with great force. It wasn't that fell. It was thrown across the room. The daughter used to say that indeed that thing had followed them to their new home. She says that at night she would see a very, very tall being of about 2 meters, which is about 7 feet tall. She saw him standing at the door of her bedroom and says that he was so tall that in a single step he reached the foot of her bed. It is worth mentioning that the rooms were spacious because, as I told you before, it was a fairly large house. She tells me that since she was living in her old house and that one day she saw this entity while she was lying in her bed while she was sleeping, This entity, as it used to do, stops at her door, takes a step, and reaches her right at the foot of her bed. She feels perfectly how this entity grabbed her combs from her hair. In the 80s or 90s, they were used a lot. She says she felt that thing grab her hair and take off her hair combs. The next day, she looked for them and found nothing. When she moved out of the house, during the cleaning and packing, she tried to find them, but the hair combs never were found. She also says that when it wasn't that old entity that showed up, she felt how someone came to her bed and lay down right next to her. She couldn't see anyone, but she could clearly feel that thing lifting the blankets and lying down next to her. This obviously paralyzed her with fear. Then over time, she got used to it. She also said that when she sat in the rocking chair, it began to move on its own. The mother of the family, she was the quietest in the family, but she said that noises were heard in the kitchen during the nights, after everyone went to sleep in their bedrooms. I don't remember the boys having spooky experiences. What I remember the most is the hair combs, the very tall entity, and what happened to my sister's uncle. He said that something was around his house and he could feel it, even that he felt it when he was lying down. He felt a heaviness on his chest, but that immediately takes off because he chased him away by saying bad words. Time passes, and one day, one of my sisters and I stayed overnight in that house, in the new house. We had been there several times before, but we had never spent the night there. That day, I don't remember the reason why we stayed there to sleep. It must have been because of some gathering or party that took place. My sister and I were in one of the bedrooms. There were 2 twin beds. My sister, I remember very well, had gone to my bed to sleep, since she has always been usually a little more fearful than me. We were both in the small bed. It was right at the window that looked out onto the street. When everyone was already asleep, I remember that we clearly heard how something or somebody knocked on the wall. There were knocks, like when somebody knocks on the door, but was on the wall, not even on the window. There were 3 or 4 knocks in a row. When I heard this, I got up because I thought the sound was very strange. My sister also heard it and got a little nervous. We both turned to look at each other and remained still and quiet, because after a couple of minutes, again those 3 or 4 taps on the wall. And no, it wasn't a random noise like when somebody moves things like some piece of furniture or anything else. No, it wasn't possible. That window looked out onto the street. There was nothing. This terrified us too much, for we remembered all the things that this family experienced. I didn't dare to peek in. I was in panic that I couldn't do anything. And I was the older sister. I was supposed to protect my sister, but the fear wouldn't let me think. That is how the whole night passed. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, we talked about it and they told us, "Oh yes, we heard that too," but we never pay attention. There were so many things that this family experienced that all those strange and unexplained situations became the most normal for them. I haven't heard from them for a long time, or at least I haven't spoken to them. Maybe if I contact them, there will be more stories to tell. The next story is one of the most terrified stories that I've heard in my life. This story is pretty creepy. I have titled "The Entity in My Bed." In the area where my mom lives, there is a very large park where she usually takes her dog for walks every day. During one of these walks, she runs into a person who she had already seen her pet walking before. One day they start talking, and as time goes by, they got to know each other. They are not close friends, well, at that time. However, seeing each other almost daily in the park, they began to talk more and more and establish a friendship. For any reason, they began to talk about paranormal topics one of those days, since she is also from Mexico. And among the things she told my mom, this is by far the creepiest I've ever heard. She says that some time ago her husband used to travel quite often for his work. And she says that all the time he did it, she was left alone. She currently has a son, but at that time it was just her and her husband. She says that many times she had been left alone and had never experienced anything like this. She's young, about 30 years old. Well, years ago she was asleep on an ordinary day. Her husband was traveling. She says that in the early morning she felt that her husband arrived and got into bed. She says that she thought it was strange because he was not supposed to return that day, but she didn't give it much thought. She tells my mom that she clearly felt when he got into bed, and being close to her, the husband began to touch her. She was half asleep, but clearly felt she was being touched and having intercourse with her husband. Well, apparently was her husband. She says it was minutes. She says that she felt she was having sex with her husband. Right after the act, the supposed husband gets out of bed. She sees him as he walks from the bed to the door. It was a little bit dark, but she says that she could clearly see that the silhouette didn't correspond to her husband's profile. She describes him as a tall man with too much hair all over his body. She says she didn't see her face, but she could tell that thing wasn't human. She is terrified when she realizes that thing was an entity or a demon. She stays still as she begins to pray because she's aware that this wasn't her husband. And while she was praying, she manages to see how that thing is gradually moving away from her room and disappeared. She gets up in complete panic and still thinking whether it happened or not. She realizes that she was completely alone. Then she for a moment thinks it was a dream. But her fear was greater when she realizes, while standing, she manages to feel that she is very wet, her legs and thighs completely soaked. She is convinced that it was a demon who got into her bed, an incubus. It is said that an incubus is a demon in the form of a man who seeks to have intercourse while women are sleeping. When my mom told me this, I was in complete shock, for I cannot imagine the terror of that poor woman when she discovered that the one who had entered her bed was a demon. If you liked the episode, please share it with someone you know loves paranormal or unexplained stories. Follow me on different podcast platforms to receive notifications whenever a new episode comes out. Follow me on social media where I share previews of new episodes before they are published. Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube as unexplained.enigma. Facebook, Chronicles of the Unexplained. Thanks for listening and see you all in the next unexplained story.